Welcome back to the Navel Gaze. I am Aaron Terrell. As my host, co-host, Tallybots. We obviously talk about autosexuality here on this show, and we are today going to cover a kind of overlap that we see a lot in this population that hasn't been formally studied, but has been kind of universally commented on, no matter what side of the aisle or what frame of reference you're coming from, and that is autism. It seems to be, within the like the hardcore wokest trans communities, they clearly see the autism overlap. The gender criticals comment on it. Even some of the sexologists to a bit. Amongst us amateur, let's say, sexologists, it's basically all of us.
It's a given,
yeah. It's just so widely observed, kind of, I would say, indisputable. But we just don't have anything officially, any official numbers, any official studies on what's linking the two. And I know I have a personal theory on it. I'm not sure if you have your own personal theory about what could be going on there, but we're just going to kind of talk about how prevalent it is, what different factions are saying about that, and I guess that's
some of our thoughts and musings throughout.
Yeah.
I guess I'll start off by saying there are some people, from what I can tell, who are looking at this overlap between autism and gender dysphoria, but not from a more woke sort of gender identity perspective I've seen. But I think it's important to say out front that when Aaron and I say autistic or talk about autism, we're not doctors, A. B, we don't necessarily mean someone who's been formally diagnosed. We're kind of talking about this general, what we have come to call like an autistic phenotype, maybe kind of like an Asperger's phenotype, even though that's considered to be an outdated term. We're talking about this sort of somewhat intangible, sometimes, neurodivergence, quirkiness, nerdiness, like people who are a little off in quirky ways, I would say. But so we don't necessarily mean someone with a formal autistic diagnosis. And we tend to be talking about more of the high functioning autistic types, not the maybe more stereotypical low functioning, obviously diagnosed because it's interfering so much with quality of life and ability to function. And if we go back to, well, that's also one of the issues sort of in this conversation, is that a lot of people mean something different when they're talking about autism. And then just from my limited experience when I was working as a therapist and as a clinician, autism is behaviorally diagnosed. And so there's going to be a lot of room for clinical impressions that's going to vary person to person. And I don't think most people have a clear understanding, or at least not one unified understanding of like what the mechanisms are for autism, what's happening neurologically. So that's a limitation in having any of these discussions, I think, and it makes it hard to talk with confidence about like what is the link or what is the origin here. But we're talking about, to make it now sound so unscientific, sort of an autistic vibe, for lack of better terms. And this is something that, like Aaron said, a lot of us, like the amateur sexologists, sexology hobbyists, have noticed and talked about. But this is also something that has been clinically observed, both coming out in the CAST report, coming out of the NHS, as well as like individual psychologists and therapists and psychiatrists who have worked with this population, like Dr. Azakim, who we recently reacted to his Gender a Wider Lens episode. He made a comment in that episode that every single one of his transsexual patients was autistic. And so, yeah, we want to talk a little bit about that overlap, and some of the implications of this, of being autistic and wanting to transition. And we want to comment on some of what we think some people have made the implications to be, that basically if you are autistic, you sort of inherently can't consent to this type of intervention. That's something that seems to be held among some faction of the gender criticals. They believe this to be true even for autistic adults, that basically, you know, autistic adults are vulnerable in some way and aren't able to make an informed, aren't able to consent, basically.
Yeah,
so these are
like implicit infantilization and kind of robbing autistic adults of like a kind of agency, I guess, almost for politically strategic reasons. And I agree. I agree with that political. I agree with the political end. Just not. I think they're going about it the wrong way there. But sorry to interrupt. Go on. You were.
No, yeah. No, but that's true. And I think also the people who make this argument, right, that who we perceive are sort of infantilizing autistic adults. To be fair, their argument is aided by the fact that we don't have such clear distinctions, that when you say autistic, it also means these super low functioning
right
people who would be vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And I think that's part of people come at the gender criticals come at this from a few different perspectives. One is like this idea that people who are autistic are sort of naturally non-conforming in some way, and they don't pick up on they're not going to mask and try to blend in with their sex the way that a neurotypical quote unquote child would. And so because of their kind of black and white thinking, they're going to think, well, I'm not like the rest of the people in my sex, so I'm not part of my sex. Maybe I'm non-binary, or I'm actually part of the opposite sex. And then there's another approach, which is basically these people are just so vulnerable and naive and suggestible that they're being conned. Some people would say conned by the doctors. Others would say conned by the culture and the ideology. And I think what the amateur sexologists or hobbyists like us want to say is that it's more likely a third thing, which is that this autosexual gender dysphoria or autosexuality in general we think is probably highly correlated with this autistic phenotype. And so these people who have this neurodivergence also have likely a predisposition for internalized attraction. Do you think I kind of accurately?
Yeah.
I think that's what most of the sexology hobbyists can agree on. And then people have maybe different hypotheses about the origins of that or the extent of the overlap.
Right. That's kind of where you and I are at, and a lot of the other people who are kind of drawing on the sexology, the kind of historic anecdotes, let's say, of what we would now identify as a transgender person, because even like so even prior to Blanchard, I'll need to reference it here shortly. But anyway, there was somebody who's writing some clinician writing about male to female gender patients, and he was describing them in words that we would today know as what we're calling about the autistic phenotype of being highly introverted, not interested in relationships with others, very tactilely sensitive, very socially awkward. I can't remember the words that were used, but they're essentially the same. Like this description you see over and over and over again. And now today we call it autism. 20 years ago, when Anne Lawrence was writing about it, she called it Asperger's. But it's like you see, it's the same type of person, specifically males in the past. But we are in agreement that it's, the same thing that we're seeing in females as well. But just historically, it was mostly males that were seeking transition. And yeah, so these clinicians are, as far as I could see it, as far back as I found was the 60s, was writing the same thing. I know some of our more hardcore into this friends will write in saying, no, Aaron, there's this one case from 1910 where this person said, and I very much appreciate you. Please do that. Please put it in the comments, because just heard anecdote after anecdote of the same patient population kind of presenting over and over again, and now, like, you'll see on the kind of woke side, I'm not sure if you were getting at this, but the kind of pro-trans, I was at the Trans Health Summit, and I got the audio, or actually somebody I was with got the audio.
I forgot you did that. Yeah.
Yep. I put it on blast, but of Dan Karasik basically saying that he had this non-verbal, this patient that was so this is, we're going into not high functioning, we're talking properly autistic. This person's non-verbal, and Dan was basically trying to find a way to circumvent the assessment criteria to get this person who is so autistic they could not even speak. And this is a minor, by the way, too. So yeah, anyway, these people are properly insane, but they're but you're still seeing the same thing. It's like Dan was saying in that same talk. It's like, yes, we see so many autistic people in our practice, and they fall back on the idea that autistic people are, or more often high functioning autistic people, or people who have ASD traits, let's say, are more likely to be gender divergent and to seek transition because they are less inhibited by social constraints and social obligations, etc. So they're more free to live out their gender divergence, and more neurotypical people would be doing the same.
Yes, the framing is essentially that autistic people are braver.
Right.
Which works in this sort of woke gender speak, because this is like the Alok, I think his name. You know who I'm talking about. I can't remember his last name. Or I don't know how to say it. I can picture the letters in my mind. But anyway, this is a lot of what he talks about is very much like cis people hate us because we dare to be authentic. Like, seeing us being happy reminds them that they are repressing their inner nonconformity. And so that aligns very well, right? You see these autists, this overlap with autism, and you say, well, yeah, these are the people who are basically, they don't have the social compunction to stay in their sex lane. And so they are the braver, freer ones amongst us, basically. Yeah.
Right. And it kind of contrasts that with the gender critical side, who essentially, they're seeing the same patterns, but they're just saying, oh, the autistic people are transitioning because they're too dumb to know that this isn't, that this is a bad idea, or they don't have, they're not mature enough cognitively to understand that you can't change sex, or to understand that having long hair doesn't make you a woman. They do this rather than glorifying as these brave, people who are willing to live their truth, while others are, too worried about, social repercussions. The anti-trans camp is saying, these people are, just not smart enough to realize that gender isn't important, and they're just following these stereotypes because they're black and white thinkers, because of the autism, and they don't know better, and these doctors are taking advantage of their simple mindedness, etc. So both sides, they're seeing, everybody's seeing the same thing, but I guess we what we think is happening.
This gets into what we were talking about in the Dr. Hakeem reaction video, the Wider Lens interview, is there seems to be, well, I don't want to attribute intention, but I think there aren't enough questions being asked. I guess it's like you said, Aaron, do we know, have we probed enough to know that these individuals literally believe that a desire to have long hair makes you a woman? Or like you said in that conversation, which I think was extremely insightful, are they inverting the cause and effect here, right? Or is this person actually trying to express to you, here is evidence of my woman identity, right? Of my gendered soul, if that's how they conceive of it. And using these external cues, these gendered cues to prove it, to explain it to people, to express it. But like it is a little, while I think there are likely some people who I'm sure could literally believe that, right? Is that really most of them? Is it most of these people? That seems like a very cursory understanding of their understanding. And we hear detransitioners talk about this a lot. And I don't want to, it's a little contradictory actually, because like, while I don't want to accuse them of lying at all, because I don't think they're lying. And some of them will say, right, like when I was then, I literally thought that because I liked these things, it made me the opposite sex. And that is what the gender ideology tells you. It tells you that all of these things are evidence of you having the soul, right, or the brain of the opposite sex. But there's something contradictory in saying that, like, we put some of these detransitioners on a pedestal, and I think rightly call some of them like really smart, you know, like really wise, really smart, really articulate people. They were so wise and so smart that they couldn't understand that these things didn't like literally I don't know if I'm articulating myself as best as I could, but there's like a bit of a contradiction in terms. Like, and then how did they, if they are inherently, something about this autistic brain makes it impossible for them to get out of this dichotomous thinking, then how did they ever detransition? How do they realize it now? Maybe I'm being a little too overly simplistic. Jump in.
We should do a whole episode, I think, on detrans. Like we talk so much about like kind of the way trans people rationalize their experience, their desire to transition, etc. I think like I've been seeing so much of it on the other side now of detransitioners. You know, they do the same kind of thing where they're rationalizing why I transitioned, why this appealed to me, and it doesn't seem to be even much more connected to like realities than the actively trans people are reaching to. And these people are, in my opinion, we're going to get into it, but these people on the other side of transition, having detransitioned, they're no less autistic and they are no less, I'll say it, autosexual than they were going into the transition. And for those reasons, especially that latter reason, there's a lot of motivation to not be entirely forthright or introspective about kind of the more baser appeals, and they're going to do. They're picking up the gender critical script and applying it to themselves in a lot of cases. You know, it's like, okay, this new ideology I found myself in says I did this because of internalized homophobia. That's what it was. It was internalized homophobia. And so just like the transitioners need to offer you an explanation so that you'll rubber stamp the transition, you know, the detransitioners are looking for, you know, the acceptable narrative to be welcomed into the new tribe. And people don't want to, you know, kind of, anyway, there's a lot of incentives to not look much further into it.
Well, and let me be a little more generous and just say what I've already said, and I think you more or less agree, which is a lot of these people, like, they're not even not being forthcoming. They are doing the human retconning. They are trying to make sense of their experience through their new path, you know,
100%.
And they're trying to make sense of it for real, you know, in real time. For some of them, maybe are some of them more on the grifty end of it, or some of them more susceptible to, I think, like you said, literally seeing this is what GC says happened to me.
Yeah. So I think even with like this idea of like gender dysphoria being related to trauma in some way, I think a lot of that has been made of it. Like, I think there was some evidence that there was some correlation between people who identify as trans and like having experienced some like maybe even like ACE scores, like adverse childhood experiences and stuff like that. And now suddenly it seems like a lot of people say, oh yes, I was traumatized, and it's all of this trauma in my life, and this maybe even CPTSD, right? That led to my gender dysphoria. And then with a little probing, you find out that the traumatic experiences wouldn't qualify as traumatic experiences in any meaningful diagnostic way. But I guess even that gets complicated because there's clinical judgment that goes into every diagnostic assessment. And a lot of people some people are much more liberal in what they consider to be traumatic experiences. But yeah, I think people, like you were saying, they sort of look to the GC or the detran script, the GC script around it, and kind of pick that into their detransition story. But that was actually part of Phil's recent Gender Wider Lens episode that came out, where Sasha starts talking about Helena, and her experience, and her talking about her autoandrophilic tendencies when she was trans-identified, and how since detransitioning, she realizes that it was actually just that she was uncomfortable with the way that women are treated in pornography and stuff. And so like she could only view like male sexuality with other men and internalized misogyny and things like this. And Phil made that exact point, which is sometimes people, well-meaning, thoughtful people, aren't correct about what they believe. And like, I think Phil said this, and if not, I think he agrees with it, and I certainly believe it, which is like, and we don't need to go around like correcting people all the time about untrue things they believe about themselves. It's not always necessary or helpful. But because someone truly believes it, doesn't make it true. And I think it's like, it like you and I have said many times before, you end up needing to rely on so many other threads, other psychoanalytic threads, to make sense of something that, if you just look at it plainly, is sexual arousal around being the opposite sex. And it's it takes so many other explanations and steps to get to that. If you refuse to, or if you're unwilling to look at it through the lens of atypical sexuality or paraphilia, God forbid that evil word. Yeah, I think I took us down a road a little bit. So I don't know if you want to.
Well, I think
reel me back in.
Well, no, I'm going to continue down it just for a second, because I think Helena is a perfect example of what you and I have spoken about the whole ROGD becoming auto-homoeroticism. And I think you're still kind of on the Phil side of this, is like, nah, it's just AAP cope essentially. But I do think that there is something about young, adolescent females being in this social group that's all about, again, probably started, it exists because of autoandrophilia, but there are these girls who then enter into this culture, and as their sexuality is developing, like this whole eroticizing of gay male relationships is what there is, and that's kind of what becomes their sexuality.
Right.
And so, like, I think just with how female sexuality works, I think somebody like Helena and others, I think it can be just a case of, ROGD becoming AHE. And when you're removed from that, and they start having actual relationships with real males in real life as women, that it's not like a constant part of their sexual psychology. I could be completely wrong. It could be 100% AAP, but I still think there's something.
No, I hear you.
That is like culturally developed, essentially, culturally contained.
I hear you. I want to linger on that for a second. That brings us back to the conversations we had a little while ago now with Ashley, the AAP from Down Under. And so I hear you. And I guess I'm definitely open to that being true. I think your explanation of it makes a lot more sense to me than internalized misogyny and porn culture. Not that these things, like, well, I don't give much credence to internalized misogyny, but like the pervasiveness and intensity of like online pornography, I think, is obviously contributing to our culture and to, you know, our psychology in many ways. But yeah, I'm more amenable to the hypothesis that they take on this trans identity, right? And then their whole sphere becomes this like queerness. Although, yeah, I guess we're talking about females, so I am more amenable to this. And that makes more sense to me than, like I said, than saying, well, I didn't want to sexualize women, and so I had to see. That is like, that makes less sense to me. I fall back on, if we saw this, our friend Olive always says this, and Annie says this too. It's like, if we saw this in males, it would be like, oh, yep, that's autogynephilia. You don't have to tell me anything about the person. That's autogynephilia. Doesn't matter if this person transitions, detransitions. That's autogynephilia. And so, like, we are. Let's put that out there, right? Like, we don't allow for the same nuance, and there are sex differences and reasons to look at these things differently. But that just sticks with me. But yeah, no, I mean, I am open to that, but I also think like autosexuality doesn't need to be someone's entire sexuality.
True.
You know,
Yep.
it's even like with like, this is different, but even like GAMP sexuality doesn't mean that you're only attracted to trans women or to, you know, the morph of the male and female body. It means that's part of like what gets you aroused. Like, GAMPs are also attracted to cis women, right? And so it can be just part of your sexuality and still be autoandrophilia. Yeah, the question, I guess, is still open to me, but I think that's a good point that you make, and it does go back to me just being like really actually removed from a lot of this like online culture, that I don't entirely understand it. I guess the other thing that I just remembered that I wanted to, I'll use as a slight pushback to you, is how different is what you're saying from the theory that like lesbians become gay trans men because they want to be close to queerness and don't want to be the ones like being the man now aggressing on women, and so they go with men. Like, just how different is that?
I'm not sure that it isn't. So okay, well,
do you get what I'm saying? I don't know if everyone else is going to get what I'm saying here.
I think I get what you're saying, but I think we need to be very kind of clear about the age demographic we're talking about.
True.
So when I'm talking about like 14, 15-year-old girls who get into like drawing the male on male fan art or whatever, or writing the stories, I think that's a very different thing than we're talking about somebody in their 20s doing that. It's like so I think, again, adolescent female sexuality is kind of, you know,
right,
the most fluid it's going to get, you know,
or someone doing this in their 30s 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah,
right. It's pretty clear, you know, what that is in my mind. But yeah, if you're a teenage girl and this is what all your friends are doing, that's just like, I don't know, I just see it as a different thing than what were you referring to, like the lesbians who transition. See, I just think those are obviously AAPs.
No, right. So basically, it's a callback to like your transparency episode that you did with Bailey, where Aaron Kimberly hypothesizes that the butch lesbian to gay trans man pipeline might be this like affinity towards queerness, and that once they transition, like they still the patriarchal heteronormativity they're still averse to, and they want to maintain that connection to the queer community. And so they and Bailey's response was like, what was
only
it like?
Women would think that way.
Yeah, right. That's how I know you're not a man or something.
Right.
So I was basically trying to say, how different is that? But you make a very good point when we're talking about age and also like time in the culture, decade even.
Yep. I think that whole, lesbian to gay man because of a queer identity, that is very much the same thing that I think you were talking about, is like, oh, I'm into this kind of erotica because it smashes the patriarchy in all the right ways. It's like
Right.
we're not talking about sexuality in this case. We're talking about
Right.
political action, and that is and if you can't separate your political views or your kind of ideological positions or ideals from your sexuality, it's not then we're not talking about sexuality really. We're talking about something else.
Yeah.
So male or female, to be honest.
You're right. And then that's what that to me comes back to. I want to hold, like, you're right. When we're talking about youth, adolescence, there's like other things going on here, and there's a lot of ideological gobbledygook that's thrown in there. But how is that, like, that is the same explanation they're giving. They're giving like a bunch of political explanations for sexual preferences.
Yep. Yeah, I think again, it is lack of a better, it's just an ideological cope, it seems to me, an explanation that suits the worldview in the same way that the trans activists are going to say, well, of course, I want to imagine I'm a woman in bed because, I'm a woman, and so that's what's going to be hot to me sexually. Anyway, sorry, go on.
I wish we could probe so many of these people. Maybe we could get some open-minded detransitioners on to talk to us, because like there is theoretically a difference between a straight girl who's transitioning and calling herself a gay man because she's into men, because she's heterosexual, right, and transitioned, from someone who is like, it has an affinity for themselves as a gay man, and like that's part of their arousal pattern. And I guess I don't know how we can disentangle these things, and I guess it would be interesting to know, and not easy to assess, like how much can, I know you and I have talked about the sort of malleability, for real lack of better terms there, of female sexuality, but it would be interesting to know, like, how much can you, to what extent can you influence like young female sexuality, right? Like, I'm open to this like broad bisexuality. Can you influence someone to like, can you influence autosexuality? Or are you basically saying it was never autosexuality?
Yeah, I don't think it was ever autosexuality. I think it's entirely external. Like, I think in the case of Helena,
it really is fascination with men on men, and not really necessarily seeing yourself as
right. I think I don't think that they're conceptualizing of themselves participating. It's just like, what is sexy is two men, and that is distinct from me. I just happen to be a trans boy by effect of identifying as trans and being a heterosexual female, but like the content that they're absorbing is just the man on man stuff, because that's what is like in their kind of online culture, that's what sex is. I think it's hard to kind of understand from outside, but like that's what basically, just the way that they talk about it, it's very much removed from themselves. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with their participation in sexuality. It's just like a voyeuristic relationship with sex. And
it's a voyeuristic relationship with it. It's not about them so much.
Right. And so I think, but they just happen to have, it's like the trans male identity is completely distinct from the sexual content that they're absorbing. But both are just culturally entwined, is what I suspect in a lot of cases. I do think that culture exists, and that is due to autoandrophilia. But I think a lot of the younger girls who get swept up into it are, but then again, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong, because again, so many of them, and here we go back to the central premise of this episode, are autistic.
Right.
So, and that again seems to be a through line here as well.
Yeah, because there's also like almost no reason for them to share that part. because that like doesn't fit in nicely with the like with
You
the
mean share the part of
share their autoandrophilia or their autoandrophilic, their former autoandrophilic proclivities, like that doesn't fit in nicely with the acceptable detrans narrative.
Yeah.
And yet there are prominent detrans activists who still kind of insist this was like really part of it for them. And there would be no reason to bring that up at all. They could literally have just said, I called myself a gay trans man because I was a straight girl.
Right.
Like, my God, it was so silly. Why did no one around me see this is just a straight girl? That's why she's calling herself a gay man. You know, that would be the simple route if it was that. I don't know though. I think these are open questions. And then it's like, is it really auto homoeroticism if it's not about them at all? Is it just homoeroticism?
That's true.
And then like, what does? Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say when I first encountered that Blanchard, the term, that auto homoeroticism, it seemed out of place to me because in so much of this community, what I was seeing was yeah, exactly. It was just homoeroticism. It was not about being the man or a man at all. It was just an obsession with gay male content that they were completely removed from. It seemed, but that does make sense for those who were so intensely invested in it as to be seeking transition in the 1980s. Yes, it would have been deeply personified in them,
right?
Hence auto homoerotic. But now it's obviously so readily, transition is so well available, and it's just in the culture that someone who just has a tiny anyway, go on.
As Sasha says, like, just what does she say? They might just have like she doesn't say a pinch, but yeah, like just an itch, just a little something. Yeah, I forgot the word she uses. No, what was I just gonna say? You had my mind going in a couple different directions. There's something else, but I can't remember it right now. But this gets back to what we were talking about in the earlier episodes of Navel Gaze about like this diagnostic criteria of like, what are you thinking about, like basically in order to climax? Because that would seem to give us something, right? Because like my wife, for example, right? Like from what I can ascertain, and I have no reason to believe that she's not just like being honest. It wasn't there's really no interest in gay men sexually, right? It's literally just for her in sexual experiences, she simply sees herself like in a male body. And she didn't process that as like attraction to men per se, right? But it is like, I need to be the man in sexual, and it was nothing about it. Right. And it's nothing at all about like internalized misogyny or any of that. It is truly like maleness is kind of better. Like it's like I lost in life kind of being a female. Which is what we kind of think auto heterosexuality is. It's it's this overvaluing the opposite sex.
Yep. And 40 years ago, if your wife was to go see a professional about this, she would obviously have been put into the category of the butch lesbian transitioners.
Right. Exactly.
So for whom all of your wife and those in the past, what we believe is they are channeling their masculine self-concept into a relationship with feminine women. Whereas the others who are more fixated on the gay male relationship were fixated on being a man in a relationship with a gay man, which obviously led Blanchard to the conclusion of the butch lesbians and the auto homoerotics. Anyway, I've beat this horse repeatedly. So
now I'm just thinking, and this will be a conversation for another day, but like, what distinguishes the autoandrophiles, the butch lesbian autoandrophiles, from like what makes these people different? I want like,
I think it's target specificity.
Okay.
I think the females with less target specificity opted for the butch lesbian thing. It made more sense to be a man with a woman, whereas I think the females who had target specificity and were specifically attracted to men as well as to being a man, those were the ones who went the what was dubbed AHE. But I think most of them probably would have subsumed their masculine internal identity in favor of having actual relationships with real men. And so I think I do believe that the vast majority of what we believe to be autoandrophilic females just went on to live normal lives as straight women and essentially just repressed this desire to be male, or it's again what they think about when they climax, you know, is how it's expressed, and they're the only ones who know about it. Is I think what's most common. But the ones who again were really attached to being male and they didn't have that strong target specificity, and they could be with women, and it was much more easy to be a male kind of 24/7 in that. But then the ones who had gender dysphoria to an immense degree, and were targetly specific to males, is where you get your Lou Sullivans. Whereas that's going to be rare, because not only do you have that immense drive internally, specifically need to be a man, and also are quite like Lou wouldn't even lie and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a lesbian," you know, like the rest of them, like so many of them did. Like, very, very adamantly committed to being attracted to men, and but yeah, I think that's just rare, because I think most females just aren't. Yeah, they're going to be much more
rigidly heterosexual.
Yeah, so rigidly heterosexual, and also so willing to just buck every kind of social norm and expectation. That's not Lou was, despite being an outlier as being heterosexual, is quite male-brained in that regard. But yeah, I do think that's what I think the difference between the butch lesbians and the AHEs is target specificity. Is my hunch.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes sense. Where my brain is going is, I wonder, and I have like no evidence to support this, but I just wonder if some of the more actually masculine ones end up the butch lesbian trajectory, and the ones who are more like, if we're thinking of this as like kind of early formation of what will manifest into autoandrophilia. This is not going to be super coherent. I'm sorry. These are just thoughts, right? We're live here. But could autoandrophilia be correlated with masculinization in some way, or like androgenization? I don't know. And the interesting thing is, like, well, this gets back to like how little we know about, how little we understand female sexuality in a meaningful way, because if the butch lesbian autoandrophiles are the less target specific, that doesn't line up with the limited findings we have about female sexual preferences, which seem to show that lesbians are the most target specific of the females, basically.
Right, but wasn't that research done based on porn viewing?
Yes.
See, and that's where I take issue with that, because I just don't think that what they were witnessing was strong target specificity. It was relating to the acts and the body parts on screen and their own sexual experiences. That's the sex that they know and relate with, and therefore are going to show stronger arousal response to, whereas they haven't had sex with men, they don't have male bodies, and so sex involving those bits is not going to elicit a sexual response, because it's foreign and therefore not.
Yeah.
Like there's no frame of reference.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think that's what they got wrong with that study. Is I think so much of females' response to porn is you keep telling me the words wrong, but is empathetic, but it's relating with the acts.
Right.
On
Right.
Screen. Yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking, please don't fall out of my brain right now. Oh, it's just like, while I'm sitting here trying to parse and I'm trying to understand, okay, what would make what's the difference between the lesbian identifying and the straight identifying autoandrophiles. Then I just think about like how much looser these categories seem to be when we're talking in the context of autosexuality and metasexuality, basically. Like, is it really that these are the less category specific and the more category specific when it seems like there can be movement in these? Like the people who go on to like the autogynephiles, I don't know, for example, who like seem to be developing sincere and surprising attraction to men later in their life and in their transition. It seems like it's just all possible under the autosexual umbrella, basically. You know, it's like autosexuals seem to like have this bisexuality, for lack of better terms. I don't mean it to use it in the way that we mean bisexuality, or even the way that sexologists mean bisexuality. But yeah, I've just really come to the conclusion that like pseudo is probably not the right word for a lot of these people and experiences. And so I'm just saying there seems to be overlap between the categories, or people can switch throughout their life, right? At different points of how they see themselves and blah, blah, blah.
Yep. Yeah. And I wonder, going back to the autism thing and okay, so I guess I'll put it, my theory here, where I think that the connection is, and this might not relate, or it may bleed into kind of what you were getting at there. But my suspicion is that whatever it is that causes autism, or that, again, that neurodivergent phenotype we're also familiar with, you know what, when you see it kind of thing. I think whatever it is that causes that, which does seem to be almost like a mirror failure, like being a little bit out of step with everyone else, like just being a little bit in their own worlds, a little bit just kind of offbeat. I think, there's this tendency to kind of live in your head, to have your own kind of like a real strong attachment to your own inner world, your own inner life, and other people are a little bit foreign and scary, and new experiences are foreign and scary. And I think whatever it is that causes this in the brain is the same thing that causes one to need to manifest in themselves that what they externally desire or need. So in the case of, romantic sexual attachments, I think in the autistic brain, what's happening is a subconscious need to embody that internally, to be that which you need externally. Because obviously, human beings, we procreate, we pair bond, etc. I think the autistic brain is just getting that wrong and trying to solve that problem internally, just like they solve other problems internally on their own, divorced from other people. That's what I think is going on, and it's completely subconscious. And but so where that theory could get into what you're saying is, I think at different times in the autosexual life, they're going to need different things externally, and going to potentially mold that inner life accordingly, or that inner sense of self is going to mold in conjunction with what one encounters or needs externally. And I think,
could you give an example of like one of the things that they would need at a different point in their life? Just like what, just color it a little bit for me.
So maybe growing up and realizing that other people are not so scary, that having sexual relationships with other people is desirable, and maybe altering one's internal concept in order to facilitate that. I think where we don't see this is in the ones that Blanchard would have called the asexuals, those who are entirely, they completely lack external attraction to others. And I don't think that is ever going to change for somebody of that predisposition, who they just completely lack external attraction. And I think that person is going to be consistently anal or erotic their entire life. I don't think that that's probably going to change. But I think just with how so many autosexual people are behaviorally bisexual, and it seems to be kind of like specifically attraction to this sex, or a little bit preference for this one, or specifically this one. Like, we tend to not be like bisexual, like open-ended bisexual, but more like specifically attracted to this for this period of my life, etc. And I'm not saying that's going to change for everybody, but again, it's just like the kind of what we kind of like lay person understand as bisexual seems to apply to virtually most transsexual people. And again, when I'm saying transsexual, I'm usually meaning autosexual people. But yeah, I think that could be it, is like you're kind of adjusting your internal sense of self, your internal like grounding or whatever, based on what you've come to desire externally, and that could change throughout the course of one's life, experiences, confidence levels, etc. Could be.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I agree with you. Like, that feels true to me, that in conceptualizing autism, and I think we talked about this in the earlier episodes of Navel Gaze, conceiving of autism as like an inward turn. And yeah, just like very much living in your own head. I guess part of where like the autosexuality theory I think is strong is that we can point out so many cases of these autistic dysphorics, let's say, who can beat the dialectical thinking, or basically can reason out of it, see the light, peak, right? All of the ideologically detransition, all of these things, and yet they still feel the desire and the pull, and the compulsion, maybe even to masculinize or feminize themselves. And so I think that is like an important distinction to be made, that I think like even in the way that you were describing it. Well, no, because you're saying that it's the same mechanism or function that kind of creates both, that kind of like creates the autism and creates the autosexuality. I think, yeah, something that supports that is the idea that I don't think it's the autism that causes the dysphoria, right? Because you can rationally, you can logic your way out of that and still feel the desire. You can understand yourself entirely in reality, right? And no longer believe any of that stuff, and be able to like accurately assess your own dialectical thinking and do cognitive, assess your cognitive distortions and stuff like that, and still be dysphoric.
Yeah, I worry about a lot of these detransitioners. You hear them say, like, I detransitioned when I realized the ideology was bunk and I was never going to change sex. It's like, that's true. That is all very true, but that's not why you sought transition in the first place. And that desire has not gone with the new acceptance of the truth. And that's kind of like what when we originally embarked upon this project, is like people seeking transition, in transition, or post transition need to have sustainable means of like understanding their experience of like kind of integrating it into their lives, and just saying, oh, I don't believe it's possible anymore is not a sustainable way to manage it.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, that's all that gender criticals offer. Is the truth pill.
Right. It's not true. You can't change sex.
Right.
Okay, but I still really want to.
Right. Yeah, gosh. And there's something like not dishonest, but like unbelievable, as in like doesn't track with logic, that these detransitioners couldn't actually see some of this stuff before. Like, even just this idea of like, now I realize that like I didn't need to be a man, I could just be a lesbian.
You didn't know that before?
Right. And of course you did, right? And yes, and you saw things differently and you believed in the gender ideology and all of this stuff. But I think and again, I think this is like probably honest retconning and people making themselves more retroactively making themselves more naive than they were.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like that doesn't really track as believable.
Yeah. And how much of it is, you know, yeah, I think you're right. In most cases, I don't think that they're aware that they're kind of deceiving themselves or other people. It's like, this is the explanation, the framework, the narrative that is available to me after setting down this previous narrative framework. And so that, yeah, they just, oh, you know, turns out I don't have to wear dresses in order to be a woman, or turns out, you know, I can, you know, be a sensitive man. I thought I had to be, you know, a woman to express my emotions before, you know. It's like, I don't know. It's just both sides just offer really, really kind of superficial and
Yeah.
no one really on either side. No one really wants to get to the core of what the internal motivation is.
Right. Yeah, and it is just like incredible that there doesn't seem to be a lot of like meaningful movement in that direction.
Yeah. No,
Like,
I've been in this for 4 years. I've been like hyper active in the GC realm for 4 years. I've been sort of tangentially, whatever that word is, sort of in the margins around it for at least 5. And they don't seem to have learned, the vast majority don't seem to have gotten a deeper this I'm sorry, includes a lot of the therapists working in this space. They don't seem to have gotten a deeper understanding of of these trends.
No, and they feel very attached to the political messaging. And I do think to a certain extent they believe it. Like in the same way that I believed it, and that's because it's partially true, and it piqued me, and all the stuff that we keep repeating. But like,
But
do
then you learn
really
more.
not see? Right, exactly. Do you really not see the nuance here?
Right.
Yeah, and it is frustrating, and I do wonder if there's people who are essentially just like. Again, I don't want to attribute malice because I don't really think that's what it is. But like, do I think there are people who are seeing that the politics changing, and so they want to clamp down on messaging? You know, like we finally have movement. You know, this space, the gender critical space, has been about like when are we going to win? Basically, when are we going to reach critical mass where people are at least able to challenge these things, right? Where we stop restricting speech in this domain. And I think there are people who see that we're like sort of, or who feel like we're on the precipice of this. And so they need to rally around their effective messaging, which is, you know, like stop transing gay kids, stop transing autistic kids, stop transing vulnerable adults. And again, there's pieces of truth in all of these things.
The problem is that nobody seems to realize, it's like nobody is plucking people off of the streets and being like, here, you got to transition because you meet this demographic criteria. That doesn't happen. It's these gay identified autistic teenagers and young people who are desperately seeking transition, and it is freely offered to them.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this the other day. Yeah, back channel. And it's an uncomfortable thing to say for people who had really negative experiences and maybe, you know, as you say, like gave it all, you know, like sacrifice to the gods of at the gender altar. But we need to remember, for the most part, the kids and the adults who are caught up in this, the ones who are going to regret it and not regret it, are begging for it.
Yep.
They're begging for it. They want it desperately. And then some of them change their minds about that, but that doesn't mean that they were groomed, and it doesn't mean that they were coerced.
And by pretending that they were, by again, this gender critical messaging, they're delaying finding the actual solution, delaying, you know, saving people from, you know,
great point. If we effectively stop clinicians from plucking people and bringing them into this, we will have saved almost no one, because the internal drive to do this will still be there. Whether that's the
And they still
internal
won't
drive,
understand what it is.
exactly, whether that's the internal drive of autosexuality and gender dysphoria, or the internal drive of like wanting to fit in and social justice, ideological, I'm non-binary type of thing. That all of that is going to exist without clinicians encouraging it. Yeah, that's such a good point. Right. You will help almost no one.
Right.
And it gives people a villain.
Yep.
Which is, I know we wanted to talk about the victim villain thing in the context of the autistics and the AGPs, and we actually should get to that. But it gives people a villain in the doctors. You know, it's these doctors, these evil doctors. And are some of these doctors doing tantamount to malpractice? Yes. Are some of these doctors predatory in a way? Yes. But to me, they're predatory because they're doing hack jobs on people and not following up with them and giving them proper,
well, and they're advertising to teenagers on TikTok. It's really, really predatory.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
I've even said that I think this is well beyond the whole prison experiments, well beyond lobotomy. Like I think gender affirming care, as they like to say, is the greatest medical scandal in human history. I've said that for years.
More widespread. Yeah.
Right. And so I do not. I've been saying for years I want a new Nuremberg for these for the WPATH, people writing these guidelines, etc. They should be held accountable for the absolute, like, this is just not medicine. But again, they are not forcing people into this. They are catering to a demographic that desperately wants their services.
Yeah.
And so we can't. Yes, I do think there needs to be justice for the very sloppy, tantamount to butchery jobs that are being performed on the gender patients, but those patients are there not of their own free will. Like, it's like, I was one of them. I mean, I have never wanted anything more in my entire life. Like, I would give you my entire life savings. This isn't a case of like, hey kid, you want some drugs? Like, that's not what's happening. These kids are desperate for it, or these adults are desperate for it.
And anyway. Are there edge cases? Sure. Like, I think back to, I think it was a Wider Lens episode. And just this idea of like some of these like youth homeless services are like funneling some of these kids into clinics and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like, are they?
Well, because you can't, if somebody like feels that they're trans or feels like there's no other option.
Yeah. No, totally. And then it's like, is it, because then some of them will say that it didn't come from them, that they were convinced into it. I don't know. It's so hard. Like, I'm sure there are edge cases, so I don't want to speak with too broad of a brush. And there are people who are vulnerable and maybe expressing distress, and then other people give them trans as the answer. But for most people, and even for some of those people, it then develops into, it's very much internally driven. Whatever like influence that it is, they are seeking it. Come hell or high water. Right. They like we talked about in the last episode about Kelly Cadigan talking about how she like blackmailed her parents basically and said, I'm going to kill myself, even though she doesn't think that she would have ever done something so extreme. Yeah, they are threatening to kill themselves. They are threatening to disown their families if they do not get access to this. And it's really hard to call that grooming. And if they are this is why I keep saying we need a cultural shift, because if they are being groomed, they're being groomed by the culture, by the pseudoscientific ideology. And I agree with you. It's so funny. Like, I want to say that I think it's too dramatic to say that we need Nuremberg trials. And then I'm like, oh no, Polly, I don't want to go light on the Nazis, because I know like whatever I'm about to say right now about the doctors, the same can be said. But a lot of these people are true believers. They don't think they're hurting anyone. They think they're helping.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But so do the Nazis. I mean, like
Right.
they believe it was for the greater good, you know. It's like, you know,
Right.
yeah,
It was
sure, they're
right.
like, yeah, like with the detransitioners or whatever. It's like, yeah, but you know, most of the
But I
trans
do want to,
people,
yeah, I got to make some distinctions here, though, and I said this already too. Like Mangala was operating on people who specifically didn't want to be operated on, right? These doctors are operating on, for the most part, people who desperately want to be operated
right.
on. And yes, you're right. The Nazis thought they were doing the right thing. They also knew they were killing people to do the right thing. WPATH has blood on their hands in very different ways. You know, like they're not literally saying yes, extermination of this group is necessary for the greater good of our people. So I agree with you. I agree with you that Nazis thought they were doing good, but there's like the bad is much more egregious. And maybe I'm just pushing back for the sake of like I push back on all the Nazi comparisons that the TRAs make. So I hear you, and I do think like the Dr. Gallagher's who you're talking about specifically, like there needs to be like literal legal repercussions for some of these people.
Not Gallagher. I think she's just working inside the confines of the existing guidelines.
But she's advertising, I'm saying, to people on TikTok and all of that.
So when I say Nuremberg, I'm not saying, oh, this is as terrible as the Holocaust. Not at all. I mean, like, I'm saying I feel like we are in absolutely uncharted territory as far as law goes. That's like Nuremberg I meant because like they had to invent new laws to try them with, and that's what I mean. Like I think we are in completely uncharted territory as what is
totally see.
like of legality and what crimes have been, because crimes have been committed. they have like just the absolute negligence and corruption is there plain to see, but I don't think that there is actually a law on the books to prevent, like, again, so from Nuremberg, it's like we need to write laws to prevent this from happening again. And that's what I mean, like need an equivalent thing at the WHO or wherever, where it's like we need to write new medical like safekeeping guidelines or whatever, and try these people with like with medical negligence, like basically.
Well, it feels like it's totally. Well, there's angles to this, right? Because there's the practitioners who were like the surgeons, the people who are literally touching clients, right, and changing them. And then there's the researchers, and there's overlap here, but like to me, a lot of the blame falls on the researchers who are releasing data based on political motivations, right? Like that's a humongous scandal, right? That Olson Kennedy and WPATH, that they had these results that just weren't stellar, and so they didn't release them. Like maybe what we need, like you're saying, is like literally there's going to be some internet archive and you have to publish all your fucking data, even if this is not what you, because, and this is actually sort of a problem in academia that we have right now, and even within the peer review process. Like I remember when I was in grad school and you would find something in a study that didn't quite make sense, and you could just like ask the researcher. You could usually, a lot of these people, you could just email them and ask them to see more, to understand more.
Yeah.
And they'll send you something else that like actually really paints a different picture, because you don't have to include it all. You just don't have to. And so and part of this is like, for a lot of researchers, they collect a whole bunch of data, and then they make lots of papers out of it. And I don't even mean that to be for some of them, it might be slightly nefarious. It's a publish or perish world. And so if you can stretch it out to multiple publications, those multiple publications are going to get easier for you to get funding in your department, easier for you to get hired. There's all of these wonky incentives here. But yeah, maybe it needs to be like, if you have any public funding for your research, you need to publish raw data for everything that you have, and then write your what are research papers? They are analyses. They are the individual investigator doing analyses based on that data. But maybe it needs to be you have to publish all of your data. Maybe that's the way to have even a meaningful peer review process, because even in the peer review process, they are not getting access to all of your unpublished data. They don't get to look at what you looked at and see if they come to the same conclusions. They're looking to make sure that there's sort of like sound reasoning around what you put out there.
And WPATH in particular, they not only do they have those kind of widespread pitfalls there. They are pretty outspoken about the fact that they know that they're right and the data will follow.
Correct.
Like they are just completely,
and because they are right, they
ideological.
need yes, and
Right.
because they are right, they need to make political considerations to protect this group who this is definitely what's happening here, and we can't allow. No, you're right, and again, I think a lot of them are just true. They believe it.
100%. Yeah. No, they might be, maybe, like kind of fumbling medical ethics, but they know it's the right thing to do for this poor population who's just underserved by the medical community and been neglected for so long, and they are basically righting past wrongs, and it'll all work out for the good in the end. Is 100% like they're. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, there are a few crazy sadists in there, like whoever funded the eunuch chapter, but for the most part, they are 100% just well-meaning. Yeah, they believe in this, and yeah,
and they're almost all trans.
Right.
And this is not an indictment on them. It's something that is it's relevant.
Right. Yep. We seem to have flipped the script entirely on the whole conflict of interest thing, and now if you are part of this demographic, you have extra special knowledge.
Correct.
Right.
Oh yeah,
right.
and that's totally rampant. Like I was working as a case manager for like severely mentally ill homeless people. Basically, that was like the cohort that I worked with, and. Yeah, like I was the lesbian and the very woke on the gender stuff. And so anyone who identified with some type of who had some type of cross-sex identity, I was assigned to their case. And I was not an unbiased impart, I wanted to be assigned to their cases. And I felt very good about that. And so I'm so glad that when they're with me, they're going to be affirmed. All these other awful people around them are going to call them a man all day. And again, you and I have talked about this. I completely resent the gender criticals who feel the need to scream man in the face of every trans woman. But I was very proud to be the person
saying man.
Affirming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And from a really good place. No. I really wanted to ease the suffering of these people. And it's so scary. There's no science left in the treatment of gender dysphoria. There is just none. Except for literally administering how many with the dosage of HRT that you're going to give people. That's the most scientific thing that's going on here. Because even when I was working as a therapist, even this was pre-2020, and so things were even yet less intense and severe. But it's just completely accepted if someone says something that then your job is to help them uncover basically this trans identity. Even with kids. And I was never writing, I was never responsible for writing a note to recommend someone or anything like that. But I have a memory of one young kid, and part of the presentation was some gender stuff. And again, looking back, I made a lot out of the gender stuff. I really focused on that because again, at that point in time, I believed in the sort of minority stress model, and that a lot of these things going on, a lot of this social anxiety and a lot of this depression and whatever is related to the fact that there is essentially some hidden and not repressed, I wasn't pulling it out of them with, psychobabble, but this thing that they're so ashamed of, this intergender identity. If we just nurture that and help correct the parents, that was very much the flavor of what was going on, even against the wishes of some of the faculty at that point. Some of the older psychologists, they weren't fully on board with that, but the inmates run the asylum. I remember being in class in grad school, and a wonderful professor talking about people having lesbian phases or trans phases and stuff like that, and we were universally up in arms and would correct our professors in class. And we kind of got reinforced for that. I remember in my first year, I corrected a professor who said transsexual. And I was that is offensive, it's outdated. Like the word is transgender. And like, oh God, this man who I think is wonderful and like taught me a lot, he like really affirmed me for doing that. Like that came around at the end in like yearly review, and it was like, you have this confidence and this sense of justice, and you know when to speak up, and you're not afraid to share your voice. I'm like, I shouldn't have been reinforced for that behavior. But I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's crazy. And like we were there and we were giving LGBTQIA, like we were struggle sessioning the faculty. Like I remember in like my third year, there was an associate professor who had the misfortune of saying out loud that he didn't believe that trans women should compete in women's MMA. And we were all like almost unanimously outraged. We were like, oh my God, I didn't realize he was far right. Like that was the first thing. It was like, holy shit, he's a Republican. Like that was the first thing that we associated this with. And all of us were universally just like, wow, like what a bigot. What a bigot. Like we all need to overcome these bigots in this department who are going to and we would all say this up, oh my God, so much self-righteousness. Like, I hope no trans child goes to see him for, like, this is what the field is right now.
Yeah.
And it really, really is. And people like, obviously that's not everywhere. And I'm glad that it's not everywhere, but I know that this is pervasive.
Yep.
Because I didn't go to the wokest school, and this was very much there. And it is very grassroots, like, not grassroots, but like it's coming from the students, and they're taking it from academia and from all of these stupid grievance studies and everything.
Right. And now that kind of cultural milieu that you've separated yourself from, most, I mean, a lot have in the last couple of years, especially, but a lot haven't. And it started years earlier, and many of them are now elementary school teachers, middle school teachers. They are in like all the therapy offices and the Planned Parenthoods. They are in like they came of age in the kind of the 2015 to 2020, and they're all in positions of power. And so how many have your story where it's like, oh crap, this is bullshit, and kind of can look back with, and I wasn't as in it as you were, because I was out of university in 2015, I want to say, just prior to it getting really, but I remember, a couple of years after that, even just having, this kind of righteous, indignation about anybody who wasn't as far left as humanly possible. And then, the more that you can kind of disconnect your values from reality, like none of you would have thought, wait, does he have a point about a male body competing against a female body? No, that would have crashed your entire sense of self-righteousness, because it's all kind of rooted in not thinking about such peasant, it's very much, it's all about this lofty idealism and not at all.
And it's about privilege
reality.
and oppression. Yeah, it's about privilege and oppression. So it almost doesn't matter. The physical reality, even if he has a point about it, doesn't matter, because what matters is people's identity and the mental health, the negative mental health sequelae that will come if you don't affirm. Misgendering is violence. Like that was very much a thing. I mean, we would all the students, we were so, again, righteous about correcting our supervisors if they would misgender someone. And like, we were responsible for changing the policies and procedures in a couple of the clinics locally, of changing the way that they asked questions about sex and gender, and the way that they would use pronouns within reports and stuff like that. And we pushed this vociferously.
And that's how it's all shifted. So such a small amount of time, because it was.
And we are fed by the experts, because again, when I was in grad school, that was when the APA officially changed the style guide to include they them pronouns to be used for singular. And so I remember like me and my lab mates telling our advisor about this in so smug, like, because at that time you could still be corrected and told to change they them pronouns in the singular use. They would get corrected to he/she or something like this. when you were using they in like the proper, we don't know who this third person is, whatever. And yeah, so we were all like totally, it's academia teaching the students, and the students use it against the older, professors and stuff like that, because we were totally emboldened by the APA saying, actually, this is the right way to do it. This is the better way.
Right.
This is the new way. You old heads are kind of stuck in the past. You guys are going to die out. You bigots are going to die out. That was like very much the feeling. And that is still very much.
Yeah.
That was
already
there. Sorry about that. But yeah.
No, all good. Yeah, that was already the feeling. Yeah, definitely amongst the students when I was an undergrad in around 2012 to 2014. There was that same kind of ethos was definitely there, but I think it just got more steam and momentum. And but I was also going to a very far left school in a very far left city, etc. So it could have been a little bit earlier than elsewhere. But yeah, what comes next? We'll see. We'll see if this momentum is dying down, because it does seem to have gotten to completely preposterous proportions and is eating itself for better or worse.
Yeah.
But we should. Is there anything on the autism?
Just one last. Yeah, just one last point I want to make, and this is kind of stylistic flair, just an observation that you and I have made, and we're not the first ones, but just this idea of like. There's autism, and then there's autogynephilia, and this sort of like how this plays out with like the quote unquote ROGD boy, and how it's if you separate these two things, then you get to have a victim in the autistic male who just doesn't understand and is so naturally gender nonconforming and vulnerable, versus the villain who is the fetishist and or God forbid, the honest fetishist, right? Someone who just tells you that this is what's going on for me. And how it really feeds that dichotomy. If we view autism as like, essentially a handicap that makes people vulnerable in some special way, then they can't be part of these sex fakers who I need to shame and yell at all the time.
And I think that dichotomy of the villainous AGP and the victim Aspie kid, like having this dichotomy of one who's so like intelligent and conniving, and and then the sensitive ones who aren't sure if they're bisexual, and they're quiet and introverted and clearly autistic, and because they have this this villain victim paradigm in their head, they're completely missing the clear overlap between these two demographics. It's the same person. One's over 35 and the other is under, but and again, like, so Blanchard didn't call it autism, he called them computer nerds. Bailey said the same thing. Again, going back, this has always been the AGP presentation. Autistic. We didn't call it autistic, but it's autistic. And now they're seeing these autistic boys and they're going, oh, they can't be AGP because they're autistic. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, in Blanchard's time, and I think we've commented on this a little bit, but like, the people coming to him probably wouldn't have gotten through with an autism diagnosis, but that type of diagnosis was going to indicate someone who is extremely low functioning.
Right.
And so what he was seeing was the
Asperger's.
Right, exactly. And I don't even know if he used that word, but it was right. It was the awkward, nerdy, computer programmy. This
engineers.
Type of engineers. Right, exactly. What we would identify as Asperger's, right? And so, this description, right, of this type of male has been consistent, even if we've used different words to understand that.
It's just that in the gender critical realm, the realm trying to save these young people from the gender train, they've already created this archetype of the AGP being this not sensitive, shy, intelligent, introverted,
not autistic.
Not
this
autistic.
actually just occurred to me. I think for some of them, they're able to use the fact that this at least diagnostic correlation was not present in Blanchard's time, because they can say, so there's a couple things happening, right? There's gender ideology exploding, and also therefore maybe dysphoria exacerbating in entire cohorts of people, right? In the ways that it wouldn't. There's access to transition. There's also increased access to autism diagnosis, and so it would be easy to say, and you might be technically correct in saying like way more autistic people are identifying as trans today than were in the past. And it's like, okay, well, there's way more people identifying as trans today than were in the past, and it's way easier to get an autism diagnosis than it was in the past. So all of these things, right? So they could point to that and say, well, there was no evidence that that we were seeing autism, in Blanchard's time. And they could point and say, wow, like, look at that really high incidence of autism in these trans populations today. And they would be right. But that doesn't mean that we're actually seeing an entirely new cohort. It doesn't mean this is a third type. And a lot of people kind of have been trying to say that. And I've heard, and some of it I think is a joke. They're like, oh, there's HSTS, AGP, and like autism gender. And there's something to this autism gender thing, just insofar as like autism seems to be highly correlated with having gender issues. But we think that's because of its potentially intrinsic link in some way, or just high correlation with the with autosexuality.
Yeah. I think it is both autosexuality, like I was explaining before. I think one is like directly connected to the other, the autism or the autism spectrum traits and the AGP traits. Anyway, like I think those two things are directly connected. But I think even separate to that is autistic people struggling with gender norms, just because it is like another social norm essentially. And so I'm not sure if that is a facet of the autosexuality thing in some cases, or if it is just a case of kind of being oblivious to just kind of social norms ascribed to one sex. But it's probably both in most cases, I would suspect.
Yeah. Sorry, just one last thing that came to my mind, and I guess it's probably obvious, but like, I guess one limitation that I see of a lot of the gender critical view is like, they need to let go of this idea. Like, we need to be concerned. Our concern should be bringing people back to reality, but not necessarily about preventing them from transitioning. Because I think if people are living in reality, then they should be allowed to change their bodies. And this is coming from someone who like, I'm like philosophically averse to body modification, including like women getting a bunch of work done and stuff like that, like I don't like it. It makes me sad. I would prefer that we didn't incentivize this. I would prefer that people didn't feel compelled to do this, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think like we need to, if we can correctly inform people, right, that, being different doesn't mean that you literally are the opposite sex, right? Having these feelings, having these desires, having these affinities doesn't mean that you are. That, like we keep saying, that's not going to necessarily stop them from wanting these things. So if people are grounded in reality and they still want to do these things, it's kind of time for people to put their money where their mouth is, frankly, for a lot of the people who like claim to not, and I don't think they hate trans people. Oh God, I'm going to sound like Brianna Wu, but they actually don't want people to transition. And I guess I do understand that. Like, yes, ideally, I don't want people to transition either, but I want people like.
But I think we've said it before on this show. Certainly, maybe said it in tweets. Is a lot of the people who are invested in the gender critical discourse are themselves people who have some probably autosexual impulses, motivations that they have successfully compartmentalized, etc. And I think there is for some people a really kind of internal motivation that I didn't get to do this. I chose the straight and narrow. You all should too. I think there is like a kind of
right, or even I changed my mind. Now I'm back on the straight and narrow, and so yeah.
Right, and so you should too. Yeah, I'm not sure what the
Yeah.
word I'm looking for is, but like not an animosity, but just kind of like
And some of them are coming from like the perspective, like since they don't want other people to get hurt, they view what happened to them as harm. And in
Right.
many cases, like that's a
Absolutely.
valid
Yeah.
term. That's the right word in many cases. But yeah, so they don't want it. Part of it, I think, is sort of emotional. It's sort of like, this thing is bad, so even if you like it, you shouldn't be able to do it because it's ultimately bad and it's going to have these bad repercussions, right? And then part of it is, I think, at least coming from a desire to protect people from the potential negative side effects of these things.
Yeah, but in order to successfully do so, we have to, kind of identify and talk about what that motivation is to be to be successful and sustainable in discouraging it.
Yeah, especially if like I guess we'll wait to see the publication, but it sounds like Phil and Bailey and maybe someone else were collecting some AGP data and like found some correlation between like knowledge of AGP or like self-identification as AGP as being negatively correlated with believing in gender ideology, basically. And so it seems like there might be some like functional utility and it really does seem that way anecdotally. Again, like being in this space, yes, I've encountered lots of autosexuals with severe dysphoria who their kind of goal is to maintain access for people like them, for to maintain access to transition for people like them. And that there's other people who very much are like, this helped them take a step back from all of that, like they're able to just understand themselves better and they've gotten rid of some of the shame around it, because I think there's more shame a lot of times if you're dealing with some of these sexual feelings, but you're an uwu pure trans woman, you feel even dirtier about these thoughts and about these feelings potentially. So yeah, it does seem like for a lot of these people, it prevents them from at least going whole hog, even if it doesn't prevent them from doing certain levels of medicalization to be more comfortable. Those are then they're unlikely to be the people insisting that I am biologically female, and they're unlikely to be the people insisting that I should have access, carte blanche access to every female space.
And I think even just knowing what it is, like having the kind of Blanchardian explanation can help one kind of identify what it is about the opposite sex that they feel most like in need of embodying or manifesting or whatever, and can just stick to that. Like, so
what a good point. You don't have to do the whole thing if you're not a trans woman and you're not a gynophilic male.
Right. Somebody's so, okay, I feel this, and therefore like the transition, trans woman is my identity. This is the route I go. But if you understand actually what it is psychologically that you're experiencing, you can kind of pinpoint what it is that how you can now kind of mold it into your life.
Women's clothes and soft skin. Right. Or something like that.
If that's, exactly. Yeah. I was going to use Ray as an example, right? It's like he realized, he wants to have, soft skin, hairless, wear women's clothes, not use women's spaces. He doesn't need to be affirmed as a woman. Some obviously do feel that, and it's very important for them to be socially regarded as female. And so that's another conversation for another day. But like, if you have this knowledge, you can kind of figure out, okay, I can live a, happy, healthy life with, just this thing or just that thing, without, going whole hog isn't necessary once you understand what it is that you feel you need to embody.
Which goes back to our mission here, which is providing a third path, right? You're not either really a woman or a pervert.
Right. Right. Yes.
You can be something else.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Yeah, I do want to talk about those like kind of emotional reactions. I think we got some interesting comments on our last video, but we're too long now. It'll be for another conversation.
I thought we were going to be able to keep this one to an hour, but
so did I. Maybe you'll crop some stuff out, but
Oh well, we covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, till next time, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
See ya.